Hey y'all, it's Kim again. So this is actually a video about Israel's nuclear proliferation problem. Anyway, I've heard some weird stuff about it, but let's see what we find just in the little bit of time that we're going to spend in this one. But anyway, Kennedy, Dimona, and the Nuclear Proliferation Problem, 1961 to 1962. This is the Wilson Center by William Burr and Avner Cohen. Okay, so Kennedy, Dimona, and the Nuclear Proliferation Problem, 1961 to 1962. President John F. Kennedy worried that Israel's nuclear problem or program was a potentially serious proliferation risk and insisted that Israel permit periodic inspections to mitigate the danger. According to declassified documents published today by the National Security Archive, Nuclear Proliferation International History Project, and the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. Kennedy pressured the government of Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion to prevent a military nuclear program, particularly after stage managed tours of the Dimona facility for U.S. government scientists in 1961 and 1962 raised suspicions within U.S. intelligence that Israel might be concealing its underlying nuclear aims. Kennedy's long-run objective, documents show, was to broaden and institutionalize inspections of Dimona by the International Atomic Energy Agency. On 30th of May 1961, Kennedy met Ben-Gurion in Manhattan to discuss the bilateral relationship and Middle East issues. However, essential and indeed the first issue in the meeting was the Israeli nuclear program, about which President Kennedy was most concerned. According to a draft record of their discussion, which has never been cited and is published here for the first time, Ben-Gurion spoke rapidly and in a low voice, and some words were missed. He emphasized this peaceful economic development oriented nature of the Israeli nuclear project. Nevertheless, the note taker, Assistant Secretary of State Phillips Talbot, believed that he heard Ben-Gurion mention a pilot plant to process plutonium for atomic power, and also that there is no intention to develop weapons capacity now. Ben-Gurion tacitly acknowledged that the Dimona reactor had a military potential, or so Talbot believed he had heard. The final U.S. version of the MemCon retained the sentence about plutonium, but did not include the language about a pilot plant and weapons capacity. The differences between the two versions suggest the difficulty of preparing accurate records of meetings. But whatever Ben-Gurion actually said, President Kennedy was never wholly satisfied with the insistence that Dimona was strictly a peaceful project. Neither were U.S. intelligence professionals. A recently declassified national intelligence estimate on Israel, prepared several months after the meeting and published here for the first time, concluded that Israel may have decided to undertake a nuclear weapons program. At a minimum, we believe it has decided to develop its nuclear facilities in such a way as to put it into a position to develop nuclear weapons promptly should it decide to do so. This is the only NIE where the discussion of Dimona has been declassified in its entirety. Declassified documents reveal that more than any other American president, John F. Kennedy was personally engaged with the problem of Israel's nuclear program. He may have also been more concerned about it than any of his successors. Of all U.S. leaders in the nuclear age, Kennedy was the non-proliferation president. Nuclear proliferation was his private nightmare, as Glenn Seaborg his Atomic Energy Commission chairman once noted, Kennedy came to office with the conviction that the spread of nuclear weapons would make the world a much more dangerous place. He saw proliferation as the path to a global nuclear war. This concern shaped his outlook on the Cold War even before the 1960 presidential campaign. By then, he had already opposed the resumption of nuclear testing largely due to proliferation concerns and his experience in office, especially in the Cuban Missile Crisis, solidified it further. This electronic briefing book, or EBB, is the first of two publications which address the subject of JFK, his administration, and the Israeli nuclear program. It includes about 30 documents produced by the State Department, the Atomic Energy Commission, and intelligence agencies, some of which highlight the president's strong personal interest and direct role in moving non-proliferation policy forward during the administration's first 2 years. Some of the documents have been only recently declassified, while others were located in archival collections. Most are published here for the first time. The compilation begins with President Kennedy's meeting with departing ambassador to Israel, Ogden Reed, on January 31st, 1961, days after Kennedy took office, and concludes with the State Department's internal review in late 1962 of the second U.S. visit to Dimona. The documents published today also include the Atomic Energy Commission's recently declassified report on the first official U.S. visit to the Dimona complex in May of 1961. The Ben-Gurion Kennedy meeting was possible only after that visit produced a positive report on the peaceful, non-military purposes of the reactor. According to the Atomic Energy Commission, Dimona was conceived as a means for gaining experience in construction of a nuclear facility, which would prepare them for nuclear power in the long run. A letter from the State Department to the AEC asking it to place prominent Israeli nuclear scientist Dr. Israel Destrovsky of the Weizmann Institute, who was a visiting researcher at the Brookhaven National Laboratory under discreet surveillance as a precautionary step to safeguard U.S. nuclear know-how. The document notes Destrovsky's reputation as one of the individuals primarily responsible for guiding Israel's atomic energy program. In 1966, Destrovsky was appointed by Prime Minister Levi Eshkol as Director General of Israel's Atomic Energy Commission, which he organized and gave new impetus. Recently declassified records of the U.S.-UK meetings during 1962 to discuss the possibilities of putting pressure on Israel to accept inspections of Dimona by the International Atomic Energy Agency. While State Department officials did not believe that pressure would work, they agreed that IAEA controls should be our objective. In the meantime, interim and Hawk inspections were necessary to satisfy ourselves and the world at large as to Israel's intentions. An assessment of the second AEC visit to the Dimona site in September 1962, after weeks of diplomatic pressure by the Kennedy administration for a second visit, two AEC scientists who had inspected the U.S. supplied Sorek reactor were spontaneously invited for I don't know what that is, a 45-minute tour to Dimona while on their way back from an excursion to the Dead Sea. I don't know what this is. Bill 40 or 45. All other references are to 40. Okay, so 45-minute tour to Dimona while on their way back from an excursion to the Dead Sea. They had no time to see the complete installation, but they left the site with the impression that Dimona was a research reactor, not a production reactor. CIA and State Department officials were skeptical about the circumstances, unable to determine whether the spontaneous invitation was a treat or a trick. I think I'll stop here and then I'll get back to this probably tomorrow sometime. I mean, I've got so many documents that I want to look at and read through and learn from and check out. So, anyway, I will talk to y'all later. Like I said, I got to go to work tonight, so I have to go to bed pretty soon. But anyway, I will see y'all later. I hope you have a good night and hopefully see you tomorrow. All right, talk to y'all later. Bye.